Okay, here we go.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday. It's a chilly day up here in the far north. The heat is on in my house. As I observe Rebecca, that is not the case in Rebecca's house. Rebecca looks tropical, suggests there's still tropical weather there. How is it in your backyard this morning? Fantastic 3CSN network of participants. Do you need a sweater? Are you choosing a second fan to put in your room? What's your temperature like outside? Whatever it might be, we're so glad that you're here and taking the time to be cozy with us on this Wednesday morning. We are in session 3 of 5. It's rubric day here in our gradebook series. We're going to rubric it up. It's a fun, I think it's fun. Thank goodness I'm the one that facilitates. I better think it's fun, right? I think rubrics are fun. It's not a good start if I'm like, well, this is a downer. No, rubrics are good. They're interesting. Lot to learn. I have two amazing co-facilitators with me today. I'm Nicole Bryant-Lesher, English faculty at College of the Redwoods. You know my face and my email by now. And if I'm new to you, because this is your first session, we're so glad you're here. My two amazing colleagues that are with me and are managing the chat are Rebecca and Roy. Rebecca or Roy, does one of you want to introduce yourself? We'll go to the other one. Right, sure. While Roy takes a sip of coffee. Sorry.
It's all right. Sorry, I'm still waking up like everyone else, even though I've been up since 6:30 or so, getting kids logged in, like some of us have been doing. My name is Roy Ramon. I am from Mount San Jacinto College, which is in Riverside County. I am also a 3CSN coordinator. I come from English, but my official title is Basic Skills Coordinator, but I'm primarily right now involved in work with Guided Pathways and our SEA funding in that committee. And so, and then of course, like I just mentioned, through CSN. So I'll be helping here along with Rebecca to manage the chat. And so if you have any questions, and you've probably already been through this, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will try to help either Rebecca and or Nicole with your questions as they come in. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Moonstone, and I am here with my lovely participants and also Nicole and Roy. I will be here to help, as Roy has already stated. I might be popping in and out to another meeting. Glad to be here.
Zoom makes us seem a little like superheroes, doesn't it? Right? We're able to pop in and out. I remember back in those old days where we saw people in real life and we'd say like, oh, if I could only be in 2 places at once. But Zoom nearly makes that possible. I'm not sure it's a good thing, but we can teleport ourselves quite quickly, can't we? For better and for worse. So folks are still coming in, they're getting adjusted. I'm gonna Zoom us, that's a little punny, but I'm gonna Zoom us along. We're gonna take a quick moment and just look again at our community agreements. I always wanna start here before we go into our work together, just to re-anchor us, re-invite us. If I were facilitating a synchronous or asynchronous class on campus or online, right? At least weekly, if not every time we met, if we were in a face-to-face class, I'd invite the students just to take a minute, have us all look at these together, make sure they're still working for us. Recognizing that the more we work together, the richer we're going to want to make that environment. And the more nuanced we might need to make these community agreements to really serve our particular community well. So let's just take a moment, maybe a minute, look these over. If there's anything that you feel is missing, anything we should add, or ways that we should kind of specify or enrich in what's here, go ahead and pop that into the chat. Anything we should add to those community agreements? Anything we can make better, stronger, more? How's it looking on your end, Rebecca and Roy? Anything you see in the chat we should add?
Looks like everyone is agreeing so far.
All right. We'll just rock and roll forward then. That works. If at any time something occurs to you, right? Just because we happen to be at a different place in our learning together for the day doesn't mean that we stop thinking about these community agreements or these norms, right? Sometimes we're made aware of something while we're in the middle of doing something else. So if anything occurs to you, just know that chat's open, pop it in there. We can always amend these as needed. As always, now is a great moment to think about getting your workspace ready, right? And so now is a great moment to be thinking about, can I get into that Google document? My amazing colleagues, Roy and Rebecca, have popped that Google Doc link into the chat. So you should see an orange box, or if you have your chat function open, on your chat box, you should see that link. And if the world is working well and smoothly for you, you should be able to click right on it and it should open up a new tab. That tab will look like this. Hooray, some folks are already in here, and don't worry, we'll get you through this in just a moment. But if you've got a tab that says Canvas Gradebook and Feedback, if it says Part 3 Rubrics, you're in the right place. In addition to that, you'll want to be thinking about anything you might want to reference. So this is Rubric Week. If you have a rubric you've used in the past and you're thinking that you might want to look at that just to reference for yourself as we're going along, that's great. You know, you could pull that up in a digital form and just put it as a tab on your computer. If you've got a printed one, you could have that available. So any type of resources that you have that you might want for your own looking, have those ready to go. Now is a great time to call those up for yourself. And then something to take notes with. Just making my own note to myself. I had my other stuff ready, but I didn't have my notepad out. Now I've got it. Or digital, if that's how you like to roll, whatever feels right for you. And then we're going to leap together to that Google document. That's our next home. If you're having any trouble finding or accessing that Google document, just please let Rebecca and Roy know in the chat. Rebecca has fingers of fire, and now there's 2 folks. Just think about how quickly your needs can now be met in the chat with double the flying fingers. Craziness on this Wednesday. So if you need help, reach on out in the chat and let's pop over to that Google document. So that Google document is going to ask you to include your name and your college, right? Or your colleges. And I'd love you to take 5 minutes and fill out the 2 other columns in blue. So really we're looking at those 3 columns on the left, right? Your name and your college. And then I got, right? And there's lots of ways to answer I got. It could be something that you learned in our previous sessions, right? Something that's been rattling around in your gray matter since we talked last week about feedback, or something you tried, something that's starting to make sense. It could also be something you already know about rubrics, right? When we talk with students about this, we talk about it as activating schema, right? Really connecting, thinking about what we already know as a great launch place for entering into new learning. So what have you already got? Knowledge about rubrics, things that are making sense from our previous sessions, whatever's bubbling to the surface for you. And then in that blue column toward the center of the page, what do you need, right? What are some questions or challenges, things you're still thinking about and exploring? Maybe you've heard of a resource or an idea and you haven't had the opportunity to try it out yet. So what have you got and what do you need? I need one of those sleeping bags with sleeves this morning. It's chilly up here. I've gotten wimpy having a nice warm summer up here in the far north, and now I am unprepared for this chilly weather. So I feel like, you know, I could get away with one of those on Zoom. It would just look like a sweater. Might be ordered sometime in the near future. So what have you got? What do you need? Don't worry too much about what's on the right yet. We'll get there. Later in this session, we're going to come back to this table to help you to think about what you've learned and maybe some next steps. Once you've got your gots and needs into the table, I invite you to, take a sip of your beverage and do a little scrolling on what your colleagues are saying in the session. What have they got? What do they need? Our one of the strongest benefits of learning together is that we have a wealth of knowledge and expertise amongst us. And so your got might be somebody else's need and vice versa. And opportunities to dialogue with each other, really help us to share and learn from one another. Take about 1 more minute filling out that got and need table, and we'll start launching into some rubric-y stuff. We've had a few folks that have just joined us. We're so glad that you're here. And if you're just getting that Google document open, we've been working on what you got and what you need. And what you might need right now is to know that it's okay if you don't have time to fill that out right now. That is totally okay. We're going to come back to this table later. We're just so glad you're with us. So if you're just getting adjusted in your seat, kind of figuring out where everything is and all the tabs, that you're exactly in the right place. We're going to launch into some learning here in about 30 more seconds. And that's okay. Just hold on to your seat. There's time to get adjusted. We'll be back to this table later. There's always time. All righty, so we will come back to this got and needs table. If you haven't had a chance yet to fill that out, that's okay. We got time for it later. I'm going to pivot us for just a minute into looking at a couple slides in the Google Doc or on the PowerPoint I make, and I build on our PowerPoint each session. So this will get us to session 3. Then we're going to go into Canvas in just a moment. So I wanted to do just a bit of framing before we get into Canvas because rubrics are fascinating and layered. So in my opinion, the most manageable way to think about learning how to design and use rubrics is to compare it to learning how to snorkel. It's just hang with me. I know that's a weird analogy, but it made sense to me. When first learning how to snorkel, right, or how to use rubrics, it's easy to be really focused on like, how do I do this thing? How do I fill this thing out? How do I make this work, right? And doing the thing is complicated enough that that's about all that you do. So even though you're snorkeling, even though you have the snorkel on and your face is in the water, you're not really seeing much because your brain's really busy just figuring out how to do it, right? But the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you strengthen. When you're snorkeling, your ability to swim and to breathe and to hold your body steady underwater are going to strengthen. And when that happens, your brain's going to have room to shift from how do I do this to what do I see? And then it gets really cool, right? So just stay with me in this analogy, right? Novice snorkelers tend to ask questions like, how do I use the tools, right? How do I make this thing work? Breathing is important. I want to make sure I can do it. How do I do it? How do I not get too fatigued, too cold while I'm out snorkeling? Right? Get a little bit more experienced, an apprenticing snorkeler might start to think about, gosh, I wonder how my body temperature and breath rate are impacting what I see when I snorkel, what fish might come close, what fish might stay far away, right? I wonder what looks different if I go snorkeling at night versus in the morning. So now that I feel like I can use these tools, I can start to ask slightly deeper questions about the relationship between me and what I see. And an expert snorkeler might ask even more complex questions, right? How do my choices impact what I see and get to engage with underwater? So not just maybe my body temperature, but this whole range of questions I could ask about the relationship between me as the snorkeler and what happens. How can I use my observations to strengthen my process and approach to snorkeling? So what's important to notice here, right, is that rubrics, like many things, take time to be able to fully engage with all of the awesome that could be. And no one would expect a snorkeler the first time out to see as much as an experienced snorkeler, right? There would be an assumption that if it's the first time you're going, you're still learning how to do it. It might take some time. And the same is true with rubrics. So a novice designer of a rubric might say, how can I use this rubric to tell students what is missing or not working in their assignments, right? The most basic rubrics are really a tool that a teacher is using to show students to justify that grade, right? To explain that grade. You got this grade because this was here or wasn't here, right? But after a few tries working with those rubrics, an apprenticing rubric designer might start to expand those questions a little bit and go from, how can I use a rubric to tell my students what is missing or not working, to how could I use a rubric to tell students what is present and working? It seems like a subtle difference. It's a huge difference in how that rubric looks, right? To focus on what is rather than what isn't. And then that apprenticing designer might say, how can I use a rubric to tell students how to design their assignments and how to strengthen for the next project? So beyond explaining a grade, how might a rubric be a way to help students think about what they do next, how to strengthen for their next assignment? And then those expert rubric users, they're going to be able to go even farther. They're going to do all of those things, but then they're also going to be able to start really thinking about what a rubric tells them as the designer, right? How can my rubric design tell me what learning concepts and skills I value most in this project, right? As a teacher, I might think I value this. What story is my rubric going to tell me, right? Did the values in my rubric align with my lesson plans, with my formative or building homework assignments and the course outline? Do I see alignment there, or do I see places where I can tighten and strengthen? What needs adjusting to add more integrity and transparency to this process for my students? And how can my rubrics connect over the span of my course to create a really rich tool for course assessment? And an even richer tool to help students share in the ownership of evaluation and revision. The first rubric I build ever is not going to be answering these expert designer questions. It can't. I'm just learning the tool, right? So I'm going to be kind to myself and I'm going to say, ooh, this is going to come in layers. So if rubrics are relatively new to you, start with slightly less complex questions. Get your feet wet. Then you can advance. And all of that can be done in Canvas because most of what rubrics tell us happens outside of the tool we use to design it. Most of it is about how we populate it with information and then what we learn when students utilize, when we utilize that to look at student work. So some questions that might drive you wanting to get into rubrics, think about rubrics. How can I make sure that I'm clear about the knowledge and skills students need to demonstrate to meet the objectives and requirements of an assessment, right? How might designing a rubric help me to think through what strong student work looks like? How can I make the assessment goals and expectations super clear to my students before they begin working, right? Could that rubric help guide their work while they're working? And we're always going to come back. How do students assess feedback on their assignments? How are they going to see that rubric once I filled it out? So I'm going to take you over to Canvas. In just a moment, we're going to build a rubric. But first, I want to show you just what grading with a rubric looks like so that you can see what this looks like in Canvas. So as always, we're in my class, which is my sandbox, which is kind of like a baking show version of reality, but that's okay. We bake some pretty casseroles in here. So if I've got a student who submitted an assignment and I want to use a rubric to grade that, if I've built a rubric and I've attached it, don't worry, I'm going to show you how to do all of that. I can come right over here to grades. I can click on it. It's going to take me to my gradebook. Again, remember that it looks like I only have one poor student in my class, but that's because this isn't a real class and this test student is secretly me, right? But that's all right. It works for our purposes. So I'm going to come over to this assignment that says Draft 1 Peer Review. And just like last session, an easy way for me to know what's living in my gradebook is to try and decode the icons. Right? When I look at this icon, I can see that test student has submitted an assignment, but I haven't yet graded it. There's not a score there, right? So if I want to take action on this to grade it, I could, again, just click on this icon and put in a score. But that's not going to give me the full range of feedback options I could give. If I want that full range of feedback options, I'm going to click to the right on this little arrow. And that's going to populate this, open up this bar on the right. And then I could make some choices here, but what I really want is just to click on this door to this hallway within my gradebook called Speedgrader. And when I click on that door to that hallway, now I'm going to see that whole assignment. In this case, the test student, also known as me, has answered the question with a string of consonants. Probably not the most successful student submission, but that's okay. It works for our purposes. Over here on the right are all those ways in which I can give feedback to this student submission. And so I'm going to take this gray bar with the 3 dots and I'm going to slide it over just so I can more fully see and work with this right-hand side of the split screen where I can engage with giving feedback. So I could just give a score out of 60, but because I've built and attached a rubric, I can use that rubric to be one of the ways in which I give feedback. So I'm going to choose View Rubric, and that's going to allow me to engage with it. So at a basic level, a rubric has 3 different pieces. It has on the far left, criteria. These are the different moves that a student or a student's work will be making, right? So the criteria are those elements of this assignment that you are measuring, right? Those moves you want to see students making, okay? So the criteria run down in a list on the left. Across the middle, there's going to be a range of ratings categories. And when we build a rubric in a minute, you'll be able to see what that looks like. Most rubrics tend to have 3, 4, 5 ratings. There's lots of good dialogue about how many should be there, right? For our example purposes right now, we just have 2. You either get full credit or no credit. Not the most effective way. 2, right? Puts a lot of pressure on students to either get it all right or not right at all. So that range can be helpful here. But this would be where there's a range of points and we have the option to put language in there as well. So on top of just the points, this could be where some descriptive language lives that helps explain what that score means, right? So if a student gets full marks, what does that mean? What have they done? What have they demonstrated in relation to this criteria? And then on the far right, as a designer, you can have a column for points. And that way, when you click the ratings for each section, the points autofill over here. When we get into designing in a minute, you'll see that you could also choose to have a rubric that has the criteria and the ratings, but doesn't have points. So you're giving feedback in a range, right, in those rating categories, so that you can tell students how well they're doing at meeting that particular criteria, but you can choose to have that ungraded and then give students an overall holistic grade rather than a grade that mathematically is summed as the portion of each criteria. So when you go to use a rubric, you just click on the rating category that fits what you observe about that student's work. And depending on how you set up the rubric, if you want it with points, Canvas will automatically tabulate those points based on what you've clicked. And then if you want your rubric to do this, again, it's a choice. When you hit save, Canvas will automatically take those total points and pop it up here in the overall score. But you can choose to uncouple those 2 decisions. So here, Canvas has told me that I scored this student having 210 points, but it didn't put it in the box up here, right? So I could put that score up here. And then that will automatically score. So you can choose how much you want the rubric to do or not do for you. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. So the rubric feature sits over here. It's the first feedback feature you would engage with in terms of like literally what comes at the top of the screen. And then beneath that, whether you have a rubric or not, you're going to have all those feedback features we talked about last week. The ability to comment, to attach, to do an audio or audio and video feedback features, and speech to text. So rubric is just an additional feature for giving feedback that lives here in Canvas. I'm going to give you a second to just kind of process what we looked at, and we'll get us ready to build a rubric together. As you're processing, sure, yep.
Super quick. I think it's a quick technical question. So Rick is having trouble using one rubric in another class that he developed, and Canvas seems to want to make a new copy of that, and he's afraid he's going to end up with lots of copies of the same rubric. And how can he add an item in the middle of a rubric if he forgot something and he wants to go back and edit it?
Okay, great questions. When we get through building a rubric, Rick, I will show you, I'll show you how Canvas interprets wanting to use a rubric you've already built in another place and what the implications are for that. Because that sounds like, that to me, that sounds like question number one is, what are the implications if I want to pull a rubric from another place? What does that do? What does it mean? How does it impact?
Yes.
Okay. And then question number two is, if I want to edit something, I built a rubric and now I want to edit it. Can I do that? And what are the implications for that?
Yes, and on top of it, can I edit it so that it will then update in other places that I've used it?
Great questions. We'll get to those when we talk about importing rubrics. So thanks for logging those. They're on my list, on my little notepad here. And we do have dedicated time for questions in this session, and we'll be getting there soon. Let me show you how to make the thing, and then we will tackle all of those questions about making them and the various other awesomes that they can do. And there are quite a few. If Rick's question got you going, oh gosh, I could build this and use it in other places. Why, yes, you could. It's one of the best things about building rubrics in Canvas. Alrighty, rightness. So when I go to build a rubric, I can get to that rubric in either way. But in general, just for your own sanity purposes, I would say that anytime you're going to build something that you want to engage with in terms of student work, it's best to go to your assignments tab. So could you build a rubric? Could you get there from your gradebook? You could, but you might also get lost down a random hallway. So what I would say is, anytime you're building something for your students, and a rubric is for your students, you might be using it to give feedback to them, but it's ultimately something you're designing for them to engage with. They're going to get it as feedback. Go to that assignments tab. It's the safest place to start. So this is where you can build assignments. It's where you can organize them. It's where a couple of weeks ago we talked about if you wanted to put your gradebook into categories, right? This is our home hub for all those designing decisions we might make. And a designing decision that I think I need to make is, I think I need to add a rubric, right? I've got this assignment right here. It doesn't have a rubric, and I'm thinking, I think I want a rubric for that. So if I've already built the assignment and I click on it, I'm at this place. I don't know what to call this. It's sort of like Canvas middle space. I've built the assignment. I just clicked on it, but I can't edit it yet, right? I know I can't edit it because I'm getting this box that says edit. And this box that says edit means, oh, if I wanted to like modify the directions, change the points, whatever, I'd have to choose this edit box. So it's this middle space. It's probably to save me from making choices I don't really mean to make unless I really want to commit to editing, right? So I appreciate that Canvas like stops me before I accidentally screw something up by myself. It's also the place where you put in a rubric. So when you've got this kind of middle space, you're not at the editing page, but you can see the assignment that you've created. You're going to see this button down at the bottom that says plus rubric. I'm going to be real specific in my language here and say, this is when you are making an assignment, meaning it's something that students will either upload a piece of homework or a paper, or they're going to write in a text box. Okay, so if the graded activity that you're asking them to do is going to require them to upload something, a file upload, or to type in a text box, then the way in which you add a rubric is on this weird sort of middle space. It's not on the editing page, is where you'll see this plus rubric button. I have not said anything about discussion forums. That's because the way to find the rubric is a little different there. So just hang with me. You can put a rubric with discussion forums, which is wonderful. You just have to build it a little bit differently. Okay. So your students are going to upload something, or they're going to type into a text box, and you want to build a rubric. You're going to choose this plus rubric button, and it's going to open up this pop-up. The pop-up gets no bigger. So rubrics also means some squinting for you. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is, right? There's no way to make this box bigger. You just got to kind of lean in to look at it. First thing you should do is title that rubric, because as Rick's question suggested, you might want to use a rubric in more than one spot, attached to more than one assignment, maybe even in more than one class, and you're probably going to forget what you titled it. So the more descriptive you can make the title, the more helpful that will be to you in a future situation. So in this case, I've got a test student submission. They're doing a text entry box or a file upload. So maybe I'm going to title this, you know, Unit 3 essay submission rubric. Something that's going to be specific enough that if I go looking for it later, I'll be able to find it relatively easily. Just like when we looked at rubrics, you're going to see that Canvas defaults to giving you all of those pieces you might want to design. It won't be a rubric if it doesn't have criteria and ratings. And you can choose to have points or not, but it's going to default to giving you the points category so that if you want them, they're there. And if you don't want them, you can remove them. When you go to build your criteria, you're going to see that there's a pencil and a trash bin. A pencil means you're going to edit it and add information. The trash bin means you'll remove that whole row. You'll remove that criteria. So let's build a couple criteria so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to hit that pencil. When I hit that pencil, notice it doesn't just let me work in here. It gives me a pop-up window. So when I hit this pencil, I'm going to get an even smaller pop-up window. So now I'm really squinting. And that's when I can edit that criteria. If it helps, and there's lots of resources on our Google Doc we'll get to, think about criteria as the moves you want students to make. The more actively you can construct that language to the move you want them to make, the higher the likelihood they will make the move you want them to make when they do this assignment, okay? So the more clearly I can say something like, essay includes a clear thesis that states the issue and the opinion, right? That's the thing I'm looking for. That's the first thing I'm going to look for in this paper, right? Does it have a thesis? Does that thesis state the issue and the opinion, right? Or if this is a homework assignment, right? I could say something like lab report includes the name of the experiment and the research team. Whatever it is, right? Whatever that first criteria is, the more specific I can make the move, the higher likelihood that my students are going to demonstrate that move, right? So I'm getting as clear as I can about what I want my students to do when I build this rubric. If I need to go more in detail, I've got this room for this long description. So I could have something up here that says something like lab report includes all required cover page content. Maybe I've made a cover page template that I want students to complete. And then here I could say more about that if I wanted to. I could say something like cover page must include, right? Research team name, whatever, et cetera, name of the experiment, dates, conducted, you know, whatever that might be. Or I could say something like requirements for cover page are included in module F. So I can either detail it fully here, or I can tell students exactly where to look to know how to find this. The clearer I can be, the higher the likelihood they're going to do it. And then I'm going to update that criterion. Let's make one more criterion, then we'll go over to ratings. If I want to add a second criterion, I just choose the plus criterion button. And then Canvas is going to give me this little tiny box, and it's going to say, do you want to duplicate it? Or do you want a new criterion? So I might want to duplicate something if my students have to do something 4 times. Maybe they need to include 4 sources, and I want them to make the same move with each of those sources. Maybe I'd duplicate it. But in this case, let's say I want a new criterion. So maybe the second criterion is experiment steps are clearly labeled and described. Okay. And then maybe you're like, we've talked a lot in class about what clear labeling means. So maybe here in your long description, you add a further explanation of what clear labeling looks like, or the maybe 5 steps for a strong description, whatever it is, right? So think about where this type of content lives in your instructions now. Does it live on an instructions page? Is it something you talk about in a lecture video? If you can copy that content into here so that this reflects those places where you're teaching these ideas, that's going to make this richer and stronger for your students to interact with. Create that criterion. So you can have as many criterion as you want. My one point of suggestion here would be to offer that there is a point when too much is too much. When you're looking at an assignment, do your best to think about maybe what are the most important moves that my students need to demonstrate. If a rubric has 25 points of criteria, imagine what that looks like from a student's perspective. They've got to get 25 things right, and then they're going to be rated on each of those 25 things. That's a lot to hold in the mind. It's a lot to get stronger at. So as a designer, if you can do your best to try and think about, what are the major things that this assessment needs to demonstrate competency with, and privilege those as your criteria. It's never going to catch everything, right? But if you can try and think about what are maybe the top 4, top 5, could I do a second assessment to capture additionals, right? How might you balance so that students know what's most important to focus on? You're going to build your criteria, and then you're going to come over to your ratings. In the same way, there's a point when too much gets to too much. If you had 35 different ratings, 1 point each for 35 points, I don't know. Personally, I don't think I can really tell the difference between a 34 and a 33 necessarily, right? Those single point increments. If you've got a huge range, it gets a little hard to know and to be able to hold in that. So a lot of rubrics tend to have somewhere between 3 and 5 ratings here. It defaults to 2. You did it completely, you didn't do it at all. If you want to add more than 2, the way to build that in Canvas is to hit this plus in the middle. And it will build from the middle out, which is really disorienting as a designer. So my hack for that is to choose the plus. I know that it's building from the middle, and that just doesn't compute in my brain. So all I do is come in here and literally put in a couple letters or write the word placeholder just so that it will hold it. I hit update rating. Now I've got 3. My rubrics, I tend to do 4 personally. So I'm going to, hit plus once more, knowing again, it's going to build from the middle, which this may be fine for you. You may do just fine. My brain, the gears just lock when I have to try and think from the middle out. So I'm just going to put something in there to keep the box, write the word placeholder, type update rating, and now I have 4. Not all criteria have to have the same amount of ratings. Something might be on a range, something might be you did it, you did not do it. So you can tailor the amount of ratings to each criteria as appropriate. Once I've got my 4, it's, I think, really common to go from the most to the least, to talk about what's perfect and then design what's missing. And I would nudge with love and suggest to go against that urge, go from the bottom up, always thinking about what's present, not what's absent. It's tougher, but it's worth it. So for me, I'm going to start from the 0. I'm going to take this pencil to edit, right? My pencil is always my editing tool. I'm going to touch that. And instead of no marks, I'm going to take my rating title and say, not yet. Because I believe that just because they didn't do it this one time doesn't mean they're not going to be able to do it. Just means I haven't seen them do it yet, right? Not yet. So my classes, I would say not yet. And then in this rating description where I can say more, I'm going to say, in order to meet this criteria, lab report needs to include all five cover page ingredients. These ingredients are listed and discussed in module B and on the assignment page. Thankfully, there's this red line that shows up so I can right click and fix my bad spelling. So I'm using this rating description when it's not there at all to talk about what students would need to do, right? What needs to be here to get to the needs. And then I'm going to choose update rating. Not yet's not the most challenging one. The most challenging one for me is the first one where they're doing some things. Sometimes it's hard to articulate that. I'm going to come in with my pencil. I'm going to edit. So I'm going to give the students some points. Some things are present. And instead of talking about what isn't there, I'm going to talk about what is there. And I'm going to think to myself as the designer, what's the minimum thresholds that a student would be meeting for me to say, there's some things here, right? So I might call this room to strengthen, or yeah, I could say, let's say room to strengthen, or strengthen to meets, strengthen this to meets. And then here I'm going to talk about what is first. So I might say, you know, lab report includes some of the required elements on the cover page. And then I'm going to include a second sentence that says, strengthen to meets include all 5 required components. And then maybe I'll include that additional information about where they would look to find that. Update rating.
Hey Nick, there's kind of a juicy question that's related to what you're just doing right now.
Great. Bring it in. Bring it in.
And so in the first session, you said you do not think it's wise investment to spend too much time on grading that results in scores less than, for example, 50%. Does that mean you might get rid of the 0 in the rating scale and move it closer to 50 of the points, 50% of the points?
Great question. Great question. Personally, yes. Personally, I don't put points in rubrics at all. I include the ratings so that students know how well they're doing on a particular criteria, but I pull out the points and I have a minimum grading threshold. So the minimum that you can get, because the grading scale is not evenly distributed, right? So like passing is 70% to 100%. So it's disproportionately weighted towards failure. I raise my floor. So if you're not meeting in any way, there's a couple different ways one can raise a floor, but the easiest way to explain it is I raise my floor to 50. So if you didn't turn in that assignment at all, then you would get a 50% because it's still failing, right? I don't need them to be in a hole of a 0 and have 50 points of digging themselves out to still be at failing personally in my class. So that's one way to create, to equitize that grading scale that is disproportionately weighted towards failure, is to bring up the floor to 50. Another way that you could do that with points is to make, instead of it being out of 100 points, you can make it out of 4 or 5 points. And then what would have been a 0 would just be a 1, right? So that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rather than out of that 10-point scale where everything beneath 6 is failing. Does that help answer that question? For more on this and other kind of meaty to wrap your head around questions of that relationship between grading and student success, there are so many innovative thinkers out there, way more innovative than me. Like I'm just borrowing from their learning, right? And so the idea of the changing the grading floor, one author who talks about that is Feldman in Grading for Equity, not the only, but one. You know, it's one of the practices I took from his book. There are other tremendous authors out there as well. It's a rich field to really invite us to think about small changes we can make that might make a drastic difference on what it means as a student to have the potential to succeed in a class and still meets academic rigor. Great question. So if you've got a 4-point scale, not yet, it's not there at all. You can't measure it because it's not there, right? So not yet. Room to strengthen. There's some things present, but it's not at meets. Your third category might be meets. Literally, it meets, right? Imagine this somewhere in the B range, right? CB range in your class, right? It meets. It has everything that it needs to. Includes all 5 lab report, cover page criteria. And then for me, the farthest category to the left is exceeds, above and beyond, right? So for some criteria, there might not be an exceeds, right? Does it have an accurate citations page? It either is or is not, right? So not all categories will have an exceeds, but some might. Where it feels appropriate to have an exceeds, in your rating description, be real clear about what's above and beyond, right? Includes all 5 cover page criteria and is perfectly formatted, you know, whatever it might be that takes it above and beyond. Personally, in my classes, the first time, because students can revise, the first time students submit an assignment, it's impossible to get exceeds. It's not on the table because everybody gets the opportunity to revise. So all we're shooting for is meets. And then they're going to get feedback from me. And then if they want to shoot to exceed, that is awesome. But we're going to take perfection off the table the first time because we're just about trying to figure it out. And that perfection as an option can be really intimidating. So we just take it off the table because they're going to have a chance to get to that exceeds if they want to. We're going to set our goals on just getting everything there, just getting to the meets. That's my class. I want to honor where you are and what makes sense in your field. So these are just ideas to kick around. That's how Rubric's going to help get you there. When you come down to the bottom, after you build each of your ratings, each of your criteria, you can adjust your points. When you adjust your points, just know Canvas is going to get squirrely with you, right? So if I take this out of 10 points, Canvas is going to do its best to mathematically adjust these points. I might disagree with what Canvas chooses, and I have lots of ways to go back in and change that. For your own sanity purposes, start at the big number on the left and go to the right, because if you turn this into a 4 and this says a 4, like Canvas gets all kinds of grumpy. If you try and mess with the math, right, it's going to want to force you into that descending scale. So should you want to adjust what it autofills, start at the far left and work your way to the right. Otherwise, you'll fight it recorrecting your stuff all the way along. The other thing that you can do is you'll see this little box. This hasn't been there forever. It's been there maybe the last 2 years. There's this box that says range. Oh man, y'all, it's the best. So you can click on this box that says range. And then what Canvas will do is for that particular criteria, it will allow you to say that exceeds is whatever the range you think. So maybe for me, exceeds is just 10 to 10. But maybe meets is 9 to 7. And then maybe room to strengthen is, 7 to 3. And then 3 to 0 is not yet. So this is another way in which you can hack the floor, right? So you could put in a range and you could say that, not yet is 5 to 0. And then maybe you just don't ever give anybody 0. You just give them a 5, right? So there's lots of ways to inch that floor up if you want to consider that as an option. So you can build it into your rubric that way as well. Okay. And it's okay to talk, I think, I would say, with students about that. If you get students that are like, how did I get a 5 if I did nothing? You can say, you can talk about that 100-point scale, right? And have a conversation about what that does. Students are, I think, really interested in being part of the dialogue about how our systems have been built, how they impact student learning and student success. They're up to that conversation. They're interested. So once you do this, you can come down here to the bottom, and then this is where you get to make other decisions about your rubric. So this is typically the second box is what I'll check to remove the points. Again, it keeps the criteria. So I can go through and use the rubric to follow my observations and suggestions to students without putting a score in. And then I can put in a holistic score. If I click that box and then I'm like, oh shoot, I wish I had my points back, I can just unclick the box and look, poof, the points come back. So they're just stored there, should you want them. All right, freeform comments removes everything except the criteria, and then there's just a big open box so you can write in your own comments rather than having the ratings, should you want to. If you want the clicked boxes to automatically input that grade, you need the 4th box. Use this rubric for assignment grading. The 3rd box on don't post outcomes and the 5th box on hide score total might be things that are of use to you if your campus is using Canvas to do some sort of large scale assessment through individual course assignments. I would say talk to your Canvas guru and your assessment director on your campus before worrying too much about that. It's not a flawless tool. So it's worth checking with them to see if it's something that your campus is going to use regularly before you worry too much about it. And then you just click create the rubric. There's your rubric. In a second, I'm going to answer questions about how to import that. I've not forgotten. I've got it, Rick. It's in my list. But I wanted to give folks a second to process And if you haven't already done so, you can populate your questions right into Rebecca or Roy in the chat. So take just a minute to process, get those questions up.
One of the big things I think folks want to see what it looks like to students once it's completed.
Totally. We will go there. We will go there. So I'm going to update these on our sheet. As always, we might not get to everybody's questions. There's so much to learn. So if we don't, you know, I'll follow up with you and I'm going to note them here so that we have them. So how can I, oops, reuse a rubric more than one place? And what are the impacts when I do? Can I edit a rubric once it is built? Does that edit impact former uses of the rubric? And then that third question, what is this? Click on the student side. What else have we got?
If you use range, could you then use rubric for assignment grading? I think the question is, with range, you still get a grade, right?
Yep.
Tony, let me know if I got that correct question right.
Yeah, that was what I was asking, because I was just curious, since it's a range for the grade number, how that would then import. If it's 0 to 5, what would it choose to import?
Great question. When you choose the range, you're going to put in the score. Yep, you're going to put in the score. If you put in a range feature, you'll have the option to put in the specific number. So you'll click on that category and then you'll have the option to put in the specific number in the range.
Okay.
Yep. So in that case, think about the rating category as being the language that communicates to the student about why they were placed there. And then you get to also adjust the number inside. So it just uncouples the comments about their performance from the score. Whereas when you don't have range chosen, the comments in the score are coupled. You choose those comments at that range level and they receive that score. Any more questions before we start answering these? Anything else coming up in the chat?
Just to restate that first checkbox, basically means free-form comments, right? It's still it gives you the option to both grade and to also write in your comments.
So free-form comments means that what shows up is the criteria box. Okay, so free-form comments, if I click that, here, I'll come on in here. I'll edit this rubric. I've got a rubric built, but I can always edit an existing rubric by choosing the pencil. Okay. Rick, to get to your second question, when I edit a rubric, it edits it for the single use of this once it's attached to an assignment. So once the rubric is attached to an assignment, it now lives with that assignment. And when you edit it, you're editing it for that particular assignment.
Can you build it somewhere else and make a master rubric that you could then pull into assignments and edit further?
I think you can. I think if you go under rubrics here, you can. Functionally, what I've done is once I've built a couple rubrics, I never build a new rubric again. I just import them and then modify them for the purposes of that new place. But you could make a standardized rubric. I don't know if you can then make changes to the standardized and have it reflect everywhere that it exists. I do not know, but I will ask if that's possible to do. That's a follow-up question that will trigger. Because it doesn't work that way with assignments, right? If you duplicate an assignment and you make changes to the initial assignment, it doesn't make trickle-down changes. So let me, but I'll find out if there's a way to do that. I'll let you know. But if I come in and I hit that button to edit here and I remove, I'll write freeform comments and I update the rubric. What my students would see is, what I would see and my students would see is this criteria. And then where it says ratings, there would just be an open text box I can type in. I would still have the option to give them points, but all that language I built that would create standardization in the feedback I'm giving them would be hidden. It doesn't go away forever. If I built it, I can always come back in with that pencil and remove the checkbox and it'll show back up. So it doesn't go away for always. But if I choose that box, it will go away for that particular instance.
And it shows at the bottom, right, Nick? Because that's one thing I noticed. Like, I always have to remind students to scroll to the bottom of the assignment so that they can see where the rubric is at.
Great question. Let's go take a look at where students see this. Let me show you one more thing before we do that. I need to go, because I'm in here. So I'm going to answer Rick's other question. Other folks might not know they have this question, but you're going to want it later, which is, let's say that you want to attach a rubric to a discussion, which is a wonderful place to use rubrics. I clicked on this assignment and you will notice, potentially to your frustration, that here we are at that third space. It's not the editing page. It's not, the overall assignments page, but there's no thing that says plus rubric. Darn it. In order for a discussion to have a rubric, it must be graded, right? You could have a discussion that isn't graded. So once you choose to make a discussion a graded discussion, you can come over on the right, 3 buttons, click on it. So it's to the right of the edit button, and you'll see this choice that says add rubric. If you don't see the add rubric choice, the first place to check is, have you told Canvas that you want this discussion to be graded? Because it won't show up there if it's not a graded discussion, if you haven't put points in and all that. But if you have and you choose add rubric, you're going to get that design space. And if you've built a few rubrics, instead of building from scratch, you could think to yourself, I wonder if I already have something that gets me halfway there. And if so, over on the right, choose the microscope or a magnifying glass that says find a rubric. Click on it. And depending upon how Canvas is set up on your campus, but this is fairly common, whatever courses you have access to still, you have access to every rubric in every course that you still have access to on Canvas. So this is where labeling your rubrics carefully becomes helpful. You can click on something, right? I want a rubric from 2016. Let's see what's living in there. Right? 2016 fall. Let's see. And then you can look at all your choices are on the right, and it'll tell you how many criteria. And frankly, when I'm building a rubric, one of the things I'm looking for, unless I know I have a good match, is how many boxes are already built. That seems really basic, but it will save you some time. So if I need a rubric with like 6 criteria or 5 criteria, maybe I'll choose this one. It was on responses. It'll give me a preview. And if it looks like with a little bit of editing, I can make it work for me, I can say use this rubric and it'll import that rubric for me. Now that rubric is attached to this discussion, I can go in with that pencil and edit it to fit this particular situation. And to Rick's original question, when I edit it for this particular situation, it will not impact what the rubric in 2016 looks like. Now that it's attached to this new situation, it will only edit for this particular time. So that may or may not be helpful depending upon how you want that rubric to function. But it does uncouple it from that earlier instance, and I can come in and edit it however I might need. If I only need 4 criteria, I can trash one. Now I only have 4. So you can always find a rubric as a way to make use of a rubric in a new place. I'll always still have my choices at the bottom, update the rubric, and then the rubric is attached to that assignment. I'm going to go into settings. And over on the right, I'm going to go to student view. And now I'm going to show you what it looks like when your students see the rubric. So they can come into their gradebook. They're going to choose grades. And this is when they're going to get a bunch of stuff that I think is really not adequate for talking to them about their grades. But at least they're on their grades page, right? They're not just on their dashboard. They've come into their grades. Better than just their dashboard. And they're going to get a bunch of icons. If you've used a rubric, the icon that tells them that you've used a rubric looks like a clipboard, and it's over on the right. And so if a student wants to see what they've earned through that rubric or through their comments, they can click on those individual icons. And then they'll be able to see that rubric. Get one that's been marked here. So they can look through. It looks like I still need to grade that. Here's one. Here's one, you can see it. So when students look through, here's their rubric. Canvas picks the colors. I personally wouldn't pick red ever, but I don't get to decide. So Canvas, if I had more than 2 categories, the categories farthest to the left, those that have the highest points would be green with a little arrow when they earn that. If it's in those mid-range, they're yellow. If they've received a low score in that category, the arrow shows up red. And then they're going to see the score. If there's language here, right, all that language that you put in about how to strengthen, that's going to show up as well. So they can scroll through that rubric. It defaults to the short criteria. If there's more, they have to click on the view longer description to see it. So they do have to do some clicking around to see it. If you're having that moment of, gosh, this is not the most student friendly, yes, I agree. Again, back here to your resources. Scroll them up so you can see them. Nicole's guide for students to help them access grades and feedback. Please use this as much as you want to. Take it, copy it, give it to your students. It's there for them. And even better, take it, copy it, give it to your students, and put yourself in test student mode in your class. Submit an assignment as the test student. And then just like I walked you through with a with Screencast-O-Matic or other screencast software, Zoom, show them in test student mode what to look for, what icons to click on, what they mean. Walk them through in a 10-minute video so that they can see the moves to make. And then they've got those written directions to help. Are there any more burning questions, or can I pop you in to discussion rooms for about 10 minutes to talk out some ideas with your colleagues? It's looking good. We got some nodding from the facilitators. They're thinking, yeah, we can do that. Cool. All right. So let me bring you back here. We've got about 10 minutes. 10 is not 12. So we'll just amend this a touch. Okay. In your group, how about each participant starts by taking 1 minute? Okay, so instead of 2, take 1. Group of 3, take 1 minute to share what's something you've learned so far. What questions do you have? What next steps are you considering? Take about a minute to share, and then let there be about a minute of open discussion time. So each person take a minute to share, followed by a minute of open dialogue amongst the three. Swap spots. Do it again. Should leave you a couple minutes for discussion at the end, and then we'll come back together and have a chance to capture some thoughts on the table. Righty. I think we're back. I'm going to do a quick point and then invite you back to the table, but I do want to do a quick point. The resource guides for Canvas Rubrics is huge this week, y'all. So don't feel like you got to take it all in at once, but there's a bunch of stuff here for you. There's Canvas guides. I've got a bunch of terminology and tips, all things rubric. So if you want to know more or think more about what does it mean to put in criteria, what does it mean to have ratings, that resource is helpful there. I've built a sample rubric that both talks about what students see and is just a sample rubric. So it's both. It's a two-piecer that's there. And then there's resources that are not from me and not from Canvas that I sent you an email, and those are also included here. Lots of powerful information on how to build rubrics from UT at Austin, Brown University, some constructive feedback on rubrics. And then when you really want to dive in deep, AAC and use value rubrics. It might spin your head off, but there's some really interesting ways to think about how they're using rubrics to get at complex areas of student learning like critical thinking, etc. So those are all there for you. The big old library you can dive into as you are ready. But what I'd love for you to do for the last couple minutes, just return to this table. For us, it's about the first 3 pages of our Google Doc. You had some gots and needs. I would love for you to revisit that table. Either add something to your gots or your needs, or add something to what's next. Having dipped your toes in rubrics, what's next for you? What feels like your next questions, your next steps? Something you're excited about or excited/nervous about? And then that last column is to let us know if you're comfortable sharing this information. When we make digital briefs to update all of you, our network, on what it's like to be in these learning opportunities online, we find that your voices are so much more powerful than us talking about what we do. You all talking about what this is like is so much more useful for our network than us saying it. So if you're comfortable sharing, a Y or a yes, and if you're like, thanks, but no thanks, just let us know that. We want to honor what feels right to you. And so a no or no thanks lets us know that as well. This Google document remains available to you forever. If you want to find it again, the easiest way to find it again is on your Google Doc, right? Where you see the title. To the right of the title, you're going to see 3 icons. The star helps you to find it kind of, but the middle icon that you'll see on your screen is different than what you see on mine. On your screen, you should see something that looks like a recycle symbol, triangle. If you click on that triangle, that tells Canvas that you'd like that tells Google that you'd like Google to paperclip this document into your drive so you can easily find it. If you're like me, you've got 10,000 Google Docs, that's really helpful. I also put a copy of this into the library of things that I make for you. And if you're like, where is that library? No worries. Right down here on our last page. Lots of stuff, my email, frequently asked questions, information on additional sources, and then this whole library that I've made for this series that includes everything from session 1, session 2, this session, and guess what's going in there soon? The recordings are done from session 1 and session 2. Thank you, Keelan, who does all of that work. So I'll be getting those up and available to you as well. They'll either go in that library or I'll send them out to you via email so that you can access those on YouTube and you can see those recordings, go back to them if you want to. Next week is all things annotation. Should your students upload something and you want to give more detailed feedback throughout the assignment that they've uploaded, we're going to walk through how to do that. So know that's coming. We are at time, folks. I know you have so many other things that you need to do with your days. I'm so thankful that you choose to spend 90 minutes of your Wednesday with me and with each other, and that we can learn from each other and dialogue to continue to strengthen for our students. Thank you so much. Reach out to me on email. You know you'll be hearing from me this week. Putter around in some of those resources. See what you find. It's a process. But I'm so glad to be doing this process with y'all. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday and a good week. Roy and Rebecca, thank you so much for all you do in the chat. Millie, thank you for your background. It's making my space feel warmer.